She picked up the wine glass and poured it deliberately onto the table in front of every person who had laughed at her, not out of rage, out of absolute ice-cold control. The room went silent, and that was the moment they realized they had spent 20 years underestimating the wrong woman. But what happened before that moment, and the man in a Navy uniform who made it possible, is a story that will stay with you long after this video ends. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels, and if it moves you, subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks earlier, slipped inside a plain white envelope with the Whitmore Alumni Association return address printed in that particular shade of gold that announced without saying a word that this was not a casual gathering. It was an event, a performance, a measuring contest disguised as a reunion. Nora Calloway had held the envelope for a long time before she opened it. She'd stood at her kitchen counter in the small apartment she rented above a dry cleaner's shop in Arlington, Virginia, listening to the low rumble of the machines below through the floorboards, and she had weighed the invitation like it was something that could hurt her. Because she knew it could. She hadn't seen most of these people in 20 years. 20 years was a long time. Long enough that she had quietly convinced herself the past didn't matter anymore. Long enough that she had built something, not something visible, not something anyone would photograph or post or celebrate, but something real. Translations. Dozens of them. Novels from Polish and Czech and Romanian and Hungarian that had found their way into English-language editions through her hands, through her mind, through hundreds of hours of solitary invisible work. Books that sat on shelves in university libraries and independent bookstores with her name buried on the copyright page in a font so small it might as well not exist. She was good at that, existing in small print. She opened the invitation anyway, and she went. The Grand Meridian Hotel stood at the edge of downtown like it had always been there, and always would be. All marble columns and brass fixtures, and a lobby that smelled faintly of fresh flowers and old money. Nora arrived at 7:14 minutes later than the 7 o'clock start time listed on the card, which was itself a small act of self-preservation. She did not want to be standing alone at the door when the first people arrived. She did not want to be seen waiting. What she had not anticipated was the coat check girl handing back her ticket with a polite smile that somehow communicated in the way that only certain social spaces can manage that Nora did not quite fit the picture. She was wearing a simple white silk dress. It had cost her more than she usually spent on clothes, but it was clean and elegant, and she had thought, she had genuinely believed standing in her bathroom mirror that afternoon, that it was enough. That she was enough. The first person she recognized was standing 12 feet away with a champagne flute and an expression like she had just smelled something unfortunate. Sienna Harlow. Sienna Rhodes in high school now. Sienna Harlow, which was a name that appeared regularly in the philanthropy sections of Washington lifestyle magazines. Sienna, who had been the kind of beautiful that required constant maintenance, the kind that took effort and money, and an entire supporting cast of people who helped preserve the illusion. She was still beautiful. That hadn't changed. What had changed was the hardness underneath it, the way her eyes moved through a room, the way a scanner moves through a document, not looking at things, cataloging them. Her gaze landed on Nora. It paused. Then it moved on. That was the whole of it. That single beat of dismissal, the moment of recognition, followed immediately by reclassification. Nora watched it happen, and felt it in the center of her chest, the same way she had felt it at 17, at 18, at every school event where she had stood slightly outside the circle and watched Sienna Rhodes organize the world into people who mattered, and people who were furniture. Nora picked up a glass of water from a passing tray. Not champagne, not because she didn't drink, but because her hands needed something to hold, and she walked into the main ballroom. The seating chart was posted on an easel near the entrance, names arranged at round tables of 10. Nora found her name quickly, the way you find your name when you already expect the worst of it. Table 14. She counted the tables as she moved through the room. 1 through 6 were clustered near the front, near the raised platform where the podium stood and the lighting was warmest. 7 through 10 formed a comfortable middle ring. 11 through 13 were pushed slightly further back near the edges of the room where the acoustics went soft. Table 14 was in the far corner next to the kitchen doors. She could hear the kitchen from her seat, the muffled clattering of plates, the occasional burst of staff voices, the mechanical hiss of something industrial. She sat down and placed her water glass on the white linen and told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she was an adult woman of 42 years who had survived harder things than a bad table placement. She told herself a lot of things in that first 5 minutes. None of them entirely worked. The other seats at table 14 filled slowly. A man named Ron Briggs, she vaguely remembered from AP Chemistry, now working in insurance, who shook her hand with a grip that said he was trying harder than he needed to. A woman named Patricia Yunt, class of 2002, who had brought her own business cards and distributed them the way some people distribute anxiety constantly, compulsively with no real target. 2 couples she didn't know at all. Recent Whitmore alumni younger, who were clearly wondering how they had ended up at this particular table and were too polite to say so. And then the chair on her left remained empty. It remained empty through the appetizers, through the welcome remarks delivered by the Alumni Association president, through the first round of table conversation that Nora participated in, with the careful, practiced attention of someone who has spent a career translating meaning from one context into another. She was good at listening. She was good at watching. What she watched from her corner table by the kitchen was the front of the room. Gently. Sienna Harlow held court at table 2 with the ease of someone who had been rehearsing this exact performance her entire life. She laughed at the right moments and leaned in at the right moments and touched her husband's arm with a proprietary warmth that was visible from across the room. Grant Harlow sat beside her like a piece of architecture, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, the kind of man whose confidence occupied physical space. He ran a private equity firm with offices in 4 cities. Nora knew this because Patricia Yunt had mentioned it while distributing her second business card. Grant Harlow, Patricia had said, nodding toward table 2 with the reverence of someone naming a landmark. You know who he is, right, Harlow Capital? That's serious money. I know who he is, Nora said. She didn't really, but she had spent 20 years learning how to translate unfamiliar texts, and Grant Harlow was a familiar type. She could read the shape of him from here. What she wasn't prepared for was when he looked directly at her, not with recognition, with the particular blank authority of a man deciding whether something is worth his time. He looked, he assessed, he looked away, and Sienna, following her husband's gaze with the automatic instinct of a woman who has learned to monitor everything he sees, looked at Nora too. This time her gaze didn't move on quickly. This time she smiled. Sienna Harlow's smile was a weapon she had been sharpening since the 9th grade, and it had not dulled. She said something to the woman on her left. The woman looked toward table 14. They both smiled. Nora picked up her water glass and looked at the centerpiece. Is this seat taken? The voice came from her left, from the direction of the empty chair, and it was a quiet voice, not soft exactly, but controlled the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry. Nora turned. The man standing at the chair was wearing a U.S. Navy dress uniform, full dress blues. The kind worn to formal occasions, dark jacket with gold buttons and rank insignia on the sleeve, 3 gold stripes that Nora, who had translated 2 military history texts and absorbed more than she intended to recognize as commander. The uniform was pressed with the geometric precision of someone for whom precision was not aesthetic, but professional. He was somewhere in his early to mid-40s, with a face that had been weathered by something more than sunlight, and a stillness in his posture that Nora recognized without being able to immediately name, as the stillness of someone who had learned how not to be afraid. He was not what she expected to see at a Whitmore alumni reunion. No, she said. It's not taken. He sat. He did not apologize for the uniform, which she would have done if their positions were reversed. He did not offer an explanation. He placed his cover, the flat-brimmed hat, on the table beside his plate with the same deliberateness with which she had placed her water glass, and he looked at the room. Commander James Whitfield, he said, extending his hand. Nora Calloway. He shook her hand once, firm, brief, the kind of handshake that doesn't perform itself. Then he looked at the room again. Loud room, he said. It is, she agreed. You don't look like you're enjoying it. I don't look like I'm enjoying it, she repeated, slightly startled by the directness. No, he said. He wasn't apologizing for the observation. He was just noting it. Neither am I. But I'm here for a reason, and I expect you are too. She wasn't sure how to answer that. She hadn't thought of herself as being here for a reason. She had thought of herself as being here out of some masochistic combination of curiosity and stubbornness, the same combination that had made her accept translations that other people had turned down because they were too difficult, too obscure, too poorly compensated. What's your reason? She asked. He looked at her for a moment. Not through her, not past her, at her. It was the kind of attention she so rarely received that she almost didn't know what to do with it. Old business, he said. You. Something like that. The dinner service began and the conversation at table 14 broke into its natural clusters. Ron Briggs talked to one of the younger couples about insurance products. Patricia Yunt distributed a third business card. Nora and the commander. She found herself thinking of him that way, not by his name, but by what he was talked quietly in the way that two people talk when they have both learned not to need noise to communicate. He asked about her work. She braced herself for the expression she usually received when she explained what she did, the polite incomprehension, the pivot to a question about what she really did, as if translation were a hobby someone pursued while waiting for their actual life to start. Freelance translator, she said. Literary. Mostly Central and Eastern European authors. He nodded. No expression of polite incomprehension. Which languages? Polish primarily. Some Czech and Romanian. Hungarian if the publisher is patient. Hungarian's brutal, he said. She looked at him. You know Hungarian? Enough to know I'll never know it well, he said. I spent 4 months attached to a NATO operation outside Budapest. You learn fast what you can and can't pick up. He paused. You work under your own name. She laughed, a short, dry sound that surprised her by coming out. My name is on the copyright page, in the acknowledgments if I'm lucky. But not on the cover. Never on the cover. He looked at her steadily. That's a strange arrangement. You do the work and someone else takes the credit. That's the industry. That's not the same thing as it being right. She had nothing to say to that. Not because it was wrong, but because no one had said it to her quite that plainly before, and she needed a moment to absorb it. Sienna Harlow appeared at their table at 8:47. Nora saw her coming from across the room and felt the old familiar tightening in her chest, the reflex of the girl who had learned to brace for impact, disguised as the composure of the woman she had become. Sienna moved through the room the way she always had, like the space was arranged for her specifically. She was wearing a dark emerald dress that had clearly been purchased for exactly this event, and her hair was the kind of effortless that required an hour of effort. She stopped at the edge of table 14 with the expression of someone who has decided to be gracious. Nora, she said warmly. I almost didn't see you back here. Sienna, you look... She paused, and in that pause, in the precise duration of it, she communicated everything she intended to communicate. You look just the same. I love that little dress. Thank you. Is it vintage? Sienna's eyes moved over the white silk, with an assessment Nora recognized now 20 years older, and more practiced at reading subtext. It was the same assessment Grant Harlow had given her from across the room. Cost, quality, category. It's new, Nora said. Oh. Another pause. Well, it's sweet. She shifted her gaze to the commander and her expression recalibrated with the speed of someone very good at recalibrating. And who is this? Commander James Whitfield, he said. He did not stand. He looked at Sienna with the same quality of attention he'd given the room observing, not performing. Commander U.S. Navy. How fascinating, Sienna said, in the tone people use when they mean the opposite. Are you a classmate, Commander? I don't remember. No, he said. I'm not a classmate. A beat of silence. Sienna was accustomed to filling silences and reclaiming social control with words, and she had several available. Nora could see her sorting through them behind her eyes. But something in the commander's directness had disrupted her usual rhythm. Well, she said, finally pivoting back to Nora, with the warm smile reinstated. You must come say hello to everyone properly. Grant has been asking about what people ended up doing and... She smiled. You know how it is. Everyone's so curious. I know how it is, Nora said. So you'll come over? Nora looked at her, at the smile, at the 20 years of carefully maintained superiority compressed into a single social invitation designed to remind her of her place. Maybe later, she said. Sienna's smile adjusted by 2 degrees, not enough to break it, just enough to register the smallest possible amount of displeasure. Of course, she said. Enjoy your dinner. And she was gone back through the tables, back toward the light. Chud. Old friend, James Whitfield said. Old classmate, Nora said. There's a difference. I know the difference. He reached for his water glass. She came over here to look at you. I know. She wasn't checking on you. She was checking on herself. Nora looked at him. What do you mean? People like that, he said in the same quiet, even tone he'd used for everything, not unkind, not cold, just precise. They need to measure themselves against something they believe is less. It's a maintenance visit. She needed to confirm that you were still... He seemed to choose his next word with the care of someone trained to say exactly what he means. Still manageable. Nora was quiet for a moment. The kitchen doors burst open briefly behind them, and a server emerged with a tray of dessert plates, and the noise of it scattered across their conversation, and then faded. 20 years, she said finally. And people don't change. Some do, he said. Most don't. He looked at the room, at the warm light and the laughter, and the performance of old connections being reinvented as permanent bonds. They change their circumstances. They buy better clothes. They marry the right people. But the thing that drives it... He shook his head slightly. That stays. That's a bleak view, she said. That's an accurate view, he said. I've been places where you can't afford a bleak view because it slows you down. So you learn to call things what they are. It's faster. She thought about this. About the 20 years of calling things what they were in foreign languages, of finding the exact weight of a word in Polish, and carrying it into English without dropping any of its meaning, without adding any of her own. That was its own kind of precision, its own kind of survival. What did you carry here tonight? She asked. Not flirtatiously, genuinely. He looked at her with what she was beginning to recognize as his version of surprise, barely visible, a small adjustment around the eyes. An old name, he said. Someone who needed to be found. Before she could ask what that meant, the sound of Grant Harlow's voice filled the room. Grant Harlow had taken the microphone from the alumni president with the smooth confidence of a man who took microphones from people regularly and believed this was simply how microphones were distributed. He stood at the podium in his dark suit and his silver cufflinks and his network of invisible advantages, and he smiled at the room with the ease of someone who had never once had reason to doubt the room would smile back. 20 years, he said. Where does the time go right? Laughter from the closer tables. Warm, practiced laughter. The laughter of people who understood what was being asked of them. I look around this room, Grant said, and I see success, real success, the kind you build. He paused for effect. And then I look at the corner over there by the kitchen. His gaze moved to table 14, and it landed on Nora. And I think, well, someone's got to translate the instruction manuals right. The laughter was louder this time. It spread outward from table 2 like something contagious. At table 14, Ron Briggs looked at his plate, Patricia Yunt looked at her business cards. The younger couples looked at each other. Nora didn't move. She held her water glass in both hands, and she didn't look away from Grant Harlow, and she didn't allow herself the small luxury of looking at the floor. She had given him that luxury too many times in her life, not Grant specifically, but men like him. The floor had been a refuge she could not afford anymore. She felt James Whitfield go very still beside her. Not the stillness of discomfort, a different kind. The stillness of someone reaching a decision. "I'd actually love to hear what you do, Nora." Grant continued warming to it, now encouraged by the room. "Tell us. Freelance translation. Was it any big projects? New labels on coffee cups? Maybe a Yelp review from Portuguese?" More laughter. Sienna Harlow at table 2 smiled into her champagne glass. Nora opened her mouth, and the man in the navy uniform stood up. He did it without announcement and without the kind of theatrical display that announces itself. He simply rose to his feet the way soldiers rise with the kind of automatic physical authority that comes from years of being required to be ready. He was not the tallest man in the room. He was not the loudest. He had not said more than a few hundred words all evening. The room somehow went quieter. "Commander James Whitfield," he said, not loudly, but in the carrying voice of someone who had given orders in wind and noise and chaos and knew how to make himself heard without performing volume. "United States Navy, retired." He looked at Grant Harlow across the room. "I know who you are, Mr. Harlow. I know your company. I know your partners. I know your current holdings in 4 offshore accounts that aren't listed on your firm's registered documentation." He reached into the inner pocket of his dress jacket. "And I know a few people who've been very interested in that particular discrepancy for quite some time." The room did not laugh. The room held its breath. Grant Harlow stood at the podium with the microphone still in his hand, and his expression had not yet caught up to what was happening, which meant for a moment he still wore the easy practice smile of a man who controlled rooms. Then his phone began to ring. He looked at the screen. His face changed. "I suggest," James Whitfield said quietly, "that you take that call, Mr. Harlow. I believe it's someone you've been avoiding." Nora set her water glass down on the white linen tablecloth. She set it down slowly and deliberately, the way you set something down when you have finally decided to let it go. She looked at the man standing beside her, in his navy dress blues, in his 3 gold stripes, in his 20 years of discipline and service and loss, that she was only beginning to understand, and she thought, not for the first time that evening, but for the first time, with the full weight of it, that she had been right. Some people didn't change, but some people did. And the difference she was beginning to understand was not luck. It was not circumstance. It was a decision, made quietly, made alone, made over and over again in the dark, where no one could see it and no one would credit it. The same way a translator works. The same way a single father raises a child. The same way invisible people survive. Grant Harlow walked off the platform with his phone pressed to his ear, and his face had gone the color of old concrete, and the room watched him go in silence. Nora Calloway sat very straight in her chair at table 14 next to the kitchen doors, and she did not look away from any of it. She had stopped looking away. That's the end of part 1. If you're watching this from Dallas, from Chicago, from a small town in Ohio at 11 o'clock at night, drop your city below. I want to know how far Nora's story has traveled. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button. Because what happens next in part 2 will change everything you thought you knew about this night. Grant Harlow did not run. Men like Grant Harlow never ran. Running implied panic, and panic implied weakness. And weakness was the one thing a man who had spent 30 years constructing an empire of appearances could not afford to display in public. So he walked. He walked off the platform with his shoulders squared and his chin level and his phone pressed to his ear, and he walked toward the far side of the room, near the bar, where the lighting was slightly lower and the crowd slightly thinner, and he walked like a man who had simply remembered an important appointment. But his hand was shaking. Nora saw it from table 14. The way his fingers gripped the phone too tightly, the white-knuckle pressure of a man holding on to something because he was afraid of what happens when he lets go. She saw it, and she filed it, the way she filed everything quietly, precisely, without making it visible on her face. Beside her, James Whitfield sat back down. He did it without ceremony. He picked up his fork, looked at the food on his plate with the mild interest of someone who had not eaten since early afternoon, and resumed dinner. As if he had not just detonated something in the middle of a ballroom full of people who thought they knew how the evening was supposed to go. Ron Briggs stared at him. What just happened? A phone call, James said. Yeah, but... Ron looked toward the bar where Grant Harlow stood with his back to the room, his voice too low to hear, and his posture contracting by the second. Who did you call? I didn't call anyone yet, James said. He cut into his food with the careful economy of someone trained not to waste motion. That call was already coming. I just made sure he was in the room when it arrived. Nora looked at him. You knew his phone would ring. I knew who would be calling him tonight, James said. I didn't know the exact minute, but I knew it would be before 10 o'clock. How? He looked at her with that quiet, direct attention that she was beginning to understand was simply how he operated. No deflection, no performance, just the plain face of a man who said what was true. Because I made a call of my own this afternoon, to someone who had been waiting for the right moment to make theirs. He paused. Sometimes, all it takes is someone telling the right person the moment is now. The table was very quiet. Even Patricia Yunt had stopped sorting her business cards. Who are you? Ron Briggs said in the voice of a man who has just realized he's been sitting next to something he doesn't have a category for. James Whitfield looked at him calmly. I told you who I am. You said you were Navy. I am Navy. Retired. Retired from active service, James said. Not retired from everything. He said nothing more on the subject. He ate his dinner. And the table, by some collective social instinct, understood that no further answer was coming, and adjusted accordingly. Nora watched him eat, and thought about the kind of man who could do what he had just done. Stand up in a room full of strangers, speak 11 sentences in a carrying voice, and dismantle in 60 seconds what another man had spent a lifetime building, and then sit back down and pick up his fork, as though nothing more dramatic than passing the salt had occurred. She had translated a novel once. A Czech author, a man who had spent years as a political prisoner and then emerged and written a book not about his imprisonment, but about the morning after his release. The First Ordinary Breakfast, the unremarkable act of making coffee. The reviewer had called the book cold, distant, unemotional. Nora had always thought the reviewer had missed the point entirely. The discipline of ordinary things after extraordinary ones was not coldness. It was the most radical act available to a person who had survived something. She thought about that now, watching James Whitfield eat his dinner. You have a child, she said. It wasn't a question. She had registered it earlier, not from anything he'd said, but from something smaller. The way he had automatically straightened the unused fork beside his plate when he sat down, the unconscious tidiness of a man who has learned to operate in a small space that a child also occupies. The photo she had glimpsed at the edge of his phone screen when he reached for it briefly, too quick to see clearly, but the small blurred shape of someone much shorter than him. He looked at her. That same small adjustment around the eyes that was his version of being surprised. A daughter, he said, 7 years old. She's with someone tonight. My neighbor, Mrs. Pacheco. She watches Lily on evenings I have obligations. He said the word obligations with the particular weight of a man for whom an obligation is not an inconvenience, but a commitment, and a commitment is not a word he uses lightly. She's used to it by now. Lily likes Mrs. Pacheco's cooking better than mine anyway. What's Lily like? Nora asked. He considered the question with the seriousness he gave everything. Relentless, he said finally. She wants to know the reason for everything, why the sky is blue, why people shake hands, why the flag is folded into a triangle. She doesn't accept that's just how it is. She needs the full explanation every time. A small, involuntary softening happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the shape one leaves behind. It's exhausting. It's also the best thing about her. Nora thought about her own childhood questions and who had answered them and how. Her mother, gone, he said, not harshly, not with the particular tightness that comes from an old wound still raw, just cleanly the way you state a fact that has been processed into something you can carry without it weighing more than it has to. 3 years ago, illness. It was fast. He paused. Fast is not necessarily a mercy. No, Nora said. It isn't. They looked at each other across that small, shared understanding. The kind that doesn't require explanation, because explanation would only dilute it. And for a moment, the noise of the room around them fell away completely. The laughter from table 2, and the clink of glasses, and the low, ambient performance of successful people performing success all receded, and there was only the quiet corner of table 14 and 2 people who understood each in their own way what it meant to carry something alone. Then Grant Harlow came back from the bar. His phone was in his pocket now, and his face had been reconstructed. Not perfectly. There were seams showing the slightly too controlled set of his jaw, the brightness of his eyes that came from adrenaline rather than confidence, but sufficiently. He had rebuilt the architecture of composure, and he wore it back into the room and took his seat beside Sienna and said something low to her that made her look sharply toward table 14. Sienna looked at Nora, looked at James, looked back at Grant. Grant shook his head barely perceptibly. Sienna's expression did something complicated that she immediately smoothed away. He's scared, James said quietly, not looking at the Harlows. I can see that, Nora said. Scared people do one of 2 things, he said. They retreat or they escalate. With a man like that, he picked up his water glass. Escalation is more likely. His ego won't permit retreat, not publicly, not in front of this room. So what does that mean for tonight? It means, James said, that this is not over. He was right. It took 18 minutes. Nora knew because she counted them the way she had learned to count things when she was nervous. Words per page, characters per line, the number of times a difficult client emailed before she responded. 18 minutes during which the room slowly resumed its previous rhythms, during which the Alumni Association president made a gentle joke from the podium about phones and important business, and everyone laughed and recalibrated, during which table 14 returned to its own careful conversations, and during which Sienna Harlow made her way through the room one more time. This time she didn't come alone. Grant was with her. He was wearing the smile again, the easy one, the one that had been installed so deeply over so many years that it operated even now almost independent of his actual emotional state. He moved with Sienna through the tables toward the corner of the room with the ease of a man who has decided that the best defense is a performance of offense, that if he comes to the problem, it cannot come to him. He stopped at table 14 and looked at James Whitfield. Commander, he said, acknowledging the rank as you acknowledge a chess piece you're about to take. Hell of an entrance earlier. I didn't intend an entrance, James said. I said what needed to be said. Right. Grant pulled out the empty chair across from James without asking, without looking at who it might belong to, with the automatic possession of a man who takes chairs in rooms because rooms do not tell him no. He sat. Sienna remained standing beside him, one hand on the back of his chair. So here's the thing, Commander. I appreciate the theater. I really do. But whatever someone told you about my business structure, I didn't receive information about your business structure, James said. I reviewed documentation. There's a distinction. A small muscle moved in Grant's jaw. Documentation from whom? From several sources, James said. Over a period of time. That's not an answer. No, James agreed. It isn't. Grant studied him. The easy smile stayed in place, but his eyes were doing something different from his mouth, the calculation behind them now fully visible to anyone who knew how to look. Nora was looking. She had spent 20 years translating the gap between what words said and what they meant, And she was reading this man the way she read difficult text slowly, carefully taking nothing at face value. "Here's what I think," Grant said. "I think someone fed you bad information. I think there are people in my industry who have reasons to misrepresent my company's structure. And I think you walked into this room tonight with a file full of someone else's agenda." He leaned back, relaxed, easy. "So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to extend you some professional courtesy and suggest that before you make any more statements about my business in a public setting, you make very sure about what you actually have, because if what you have turns out to be inaccurate." He let the pause do the work a threat would do more clumsily. That creates a different kind of problem. For you. James Whitfield was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had not changed at all. Not in volume, not in pace, not in anything. "Mr. Harlow, in 2019, through a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Arcadia Asset Partners, your firm directed $34 million into a residential development project in Northern Virginia. That project was managed by a company called Meridian Build Group, which was co-owned by a man named Daniel Rourke." Grant went very still. Daniel Rourke was at the time under active investigation by the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network for wire fraud related to a separate project in Maryland. Your firm's legal team received notification of that investigation in March of 2019. The Arcadia transaction was completed in April of 2019. James looked at Grant across the table without expression. 3 weeks after your attorneys knew. The documentation I reviewed includes the notification memo, the transaction records, and a series of internal emails discussing whether the reputational risk of proceeding was manageable. The word manageable appears 11 times in those emails, Mr. Harlow. I counted. The smile was gone. Not adjusted. Not modified. Gone. Sienna's hand resting on the back of Grant's chair had become motionless. "How?" Grant started. "Daniel Rourke," James said, "has been cooperating with federal investigators since January of this year. I imagine the call you received earlier this evening had something to do with that." He picked up his water glass. "I wasn't the source of that call. I simply knew it was coming." The table was so quiet that Nora could hear the kitchen beyond the doors, the steady industrial rhythm of people doing work that no one in this room would ever acknowledge. "Who are you?" Grant said. He said it without the executive composure now. He said it the way ordinary people ask questions when the ground has shifted and they are trying to find something solid. "I told you who I am," James said. "I'm the man who was sitting in the corner by the kitchen when you made a joke about a woman's work to entertain a room. That's all." He set the water glass down. "And I'm also the man who received an invitation to this event under the name of someone I've been looking for a long time. So I came. And I found more than I expected." He glanced at Nora when he said it, just briefly. A glance that contained something she didn't yet have full words for, the way a translation sometimes begins with the intuition of meaning before the exact words arrive. Grant stood up. He did it carefully, the way a man stands when his legs may not be entirely reliable. He looked at Nora with an expression she hadn't seen on his face all evening. Not the contempt, not the easy cruelty of someone performing for a crowd. Something older and less rehearsed. Almost confusion. The confusion of a man encountering something he had not assigned a category to and now too late needed one. "Nora," he said. She looked at him. He stopped, tried again. "The translation thing. I was just having fun," she said. "I know. You were just having fun." She held his gaze. "I've been the punchline in that joke for a very long time, Grant. I'm used to the setup. What I'm no longer willing to do is perform my part of it." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he turned and walked away from the table, and Sienna went with him, and the space they left behind was not the comfortable absence of unwanted company, but something more complicated. The particular silence that follows when something that has been wrong for a very long time finally gets named out loud. Patricia Yunt let out a long breath. "Well," she said, "that was something." "Yes," Nora said. "It was." James Whitfield looked at his plate. "Did they clear the entrees already? I didn't finish." Ron Briggs stared at him for a full 3 seconds. Then he laughed. A real laugh startled out of him, the kind that arrives before your social filter has time to screen it. "You're something else, Commander. You know that—" "So my daughter tells me," James said. Nora smiled. She didn't plan it. It arrived on its own the way the real ones do, and it felt strange on her face because she hadn't used it genuinely all evening, and her face had almost forgotten what it was for. But across the room, the things that had been set in motion were not finished. Nora could see it in the quality of stillness at table 2. Could see Sienna leaning into Grant's ear, the sharp angle of her whisper. Could see Grant on his phone again this time, not pressed to his ear, but typing rapidly, his thumbs moving with the frantic energy of a man sending messages he should have sent earlier. She could see 2 other men at nearby tables who had been introduced to her earlier as colleagues of Grant's men from his industry, from his network, from the particular ecosystem of connections that a private equity firm cultivates. Now also on their phones, now also whispering, and the contagion of quiet alarm that was spreading outward from table 2 like something in water. "It's moving," she said to James. "Whatever you started." "It was already moving," he said. "I didn't start it. Rourke did in January when he started talking to investigators. I just made sure the timeline intersected with tonight." "Why tonight?" He was quiet for a moment, looking at his hands on the table. The hands of a man who had spent years in discipline and service in the physical vocabulary of hard work, and they showed it not roughly but honestly, the way a tool shows its use. "Because I was going to be here anyway," he said. "For the other reason." "The invitation." "Yes." "The old name," she said, remembering. "Someone you were looking for." "Someone I knew a long time ago," he said. "Someone who, when I was young, before the Navy, before any of it." He stopped, looked at the table. The way you look at something when you are deciding whether to continue. "I wasn't always what I am now. I grew up without much, without stability. There was a period—" He paused. "There was a period of a few years in my early 20s when I was completely on my own. Not just alone. Actually without resources. Without a roof most of the time." Nora said nothing. She waited the way she waited when a sentence in a foreign text needed space to finish itself. "There was a man who helped me," James said. "He found me in a bad situation, and he didn't make a project of me, didn't make it a charity, didn't make it about himself. He just helped. Gave me a place to sleep for 3 months. Introduced me to the Navy recruiter who changed my entire trajectory." He looked at the room, at the warm light and the performance of success. He was a Whitmore alumnus. He died 4 years ago. His family kept his alumni membership active because they didn't know how to cancel it or didn't want to, and every year his name is on the mailing list. "His name was on the invitation," Nora said. "Thomas Garrison," James said. "His name was Thomas Garrison, and when the envelope arrived at his daughter's house with the reunion invitation, she called me because she knew what he had meant to me, and she thought—" He stopped. "She thought maybe I should go. Maybe I should see the kind of world he'd come from, since I'd never understood why someone from that world had been kind to someone like me." Nora held that. She held it the way you hold a piece of a foreign text that has suddenly revealed the meaning of the whole, the single sentence that unlocks the paragraph, the word that makes the rest of the page readable. "And now you're here," she said. "And now I'm here," he said. "And none of the things I expected are what I found." He looked at her when he said that. Directly, in the way he did everything, without evasion, without the social softening that would make it easier but less true. And Nora, who had spent 20 years learning to read exactly what words meant, read what those words meant. She looked away first, not because she was uncomfortable, because she needed a moment that was only hers, a breath of space, to absorb something unexpected before she was ready to be seen absorbing it. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All right." What Grant did earlier, the joke, the microphone. She kept her voice level. She had practiced being level for a long time. "That was not the worst of it. That was the public version of something I have been experiencing from people in that circle for 20 years. Versions of it. Small ones. The way Sienna looked at my dress tonight. The table placement. The way people ask what I do and then immediately look for someone more interesting to talk to. She paused. I have been invisible for so long that I started to believe invisibility was just my natural state, that some people are seen and some people aren't, and the division is fixed. It isn't, James said. I know that, she said. Intellectually, I know that. But knowing it and inhabiting it. She shook her head. Those are different things. Yes, he said. They are. He was quiet for a moment. I know the difference from the other side. For a long time, I believed I was the kind of person who didn't get to have things. Not good things. Not permanent things. The Navy gave me structure, and the structure gave me a way to exist in the world that wasn't about what I deserved, but about what I could do. You do the work. The work is what matters. He looked at her. You know that. You've been doing that for 20 years, without anyone seeing it. Thomas Garrison saw things in me that I couldn't see in myself, James said. He didn't need me to be visible to everyone. He just needed to see me clearly himself. That was enough to change everything. He paused. One person seeing you accurately is worth 1,000 people seeing you wrong. Nora looked at the centerpiece, at the white flowers Hotel Perfect designed by someone whose job was to create the impression of beauty without any particular feeling behind it. She thought about the novels she had translated, the Polish poet who wrote about surviving winter by learning to love the cold, the Romanian novelist who wrote about a woman who spent 30 years being no one, and then one night in a single conversation became herself. She had thought she was translating other people's stories. She was beginning to understand she had been translating her own. What happens now? She asked. With Harlow. Tonight more phone calls, James said. By next week, the investigators who've been building this case will have everything they need from Rourke, and Harlow's attorneys will be negotiating terms. Whether it goes to trial. He shook his head slightly. That's not mine to decide. That's already out of my hands. Has been since January. You've been involved in this since January. I've been aware of it since January, he said. I know people who work in the relevant offices. I didn't engineer any of it. He considered his words. I made sure the timing worked, for reasons that had nothing to do with Harlow and everything to do with Thomas Garrison, and a debt I can never fully repay. A debt to a dead man. The best debts are to dead men, he said without irony. They can't release you from them. So you have to carry them forward. You have to do something worthy of them. He paused. Thomas would have hated tonight. The performance of it. The cruelty dressed up as social interaction. He would have been furious about what Harlow did to you. You didn't know me before tonight. No, he said. But I would have been furious anyway. On principle. He looked at the room with something that was not quite anger and not quite sorrow, but lived between them. I've been in places where the hierarchy is real, where rank and authority and the use of power are matters of life. I understand earned authority. What I cannot tolerate is the performance of power over people who have no protection from it. He looked at her. You deserved protection tonight. You deserved someone in your corner. I happened to be in the corner with you. Nora thought about that for a long time. About corners, about the geography of rooms, about the 20 years of tables near kitchen doors of small print on copyright pages of existing in the margins of other people's visibility. About how sometimes the corner was not the punishment it appeared to be. Sometimes the corner was where the honest people ended up. The ones who refused to perform. The ones who did the work without the audience. The ones who translated meaning without requiring credit. Sometimes the corner was exactly where you needed to be to see the whole room clearly. James, she said. Yes. Thank you. He looked at her without deflection, without the social maneuver of deflecting gratitude. You haven't needed what I gave you tonight, he said. You've been surviving without it for 20 years. What happened tonight was just the rest of the room catching up to what you already were. From across the room, raised voices began, not loud yet, but insistent. The sound of a situation that had been held below the surface finally breaking through. Grant Harlow was standing. His phone was in his hand, and two men Nora didn't know were standing with him, and the conversation they were having had broken out of the polite register entirely. Sienna stood slightly apart from him, and her face was doing something Nora had never seen it do in 20 years. It was afraid. Not the performed worry of a woman practiced in social management. Something deeper and less rehearsed than that. The fear of a woman who has built her entire life on a structure she is only now understanding may not have been as solid as she believed. She looked across the room toward table 14. She looked at Nora. And Nora, for the first time in 20 years, did not look away first. She held Sienna Harlow's gaze across the room, across the tables and the centerpieces, and the 20 years between them, and she held it until Sienna was the one who turned away. It was a small thing. No one saw it. No one would write it down, or photograph it, or celebrate it. But Nora felt it in the deepest and most private part of herself. The place where the 20 years lived. The place that had absorbed every small dismissal, and every polite cruelty, and every table by the kitchen door. And she felt something shift there. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, quietly. The way the most important things always happen. The raised voices across the room didn't peak all at once. They built the way. Pressure builds gradually, invisibly, and then suddenly at a threshold where it could no longer be contained. Grant Harlow was speaking to the two men in low, urgent tones that had stopped pretending to be casual, and Nora could see from table 14 the way the conversation was losing its architecture. The careful structure of a man used to controlling outcomes was visibly coming apart at the joints, and the two men he was speaking to colleagues. Nora had gathered men from his professional world who had come to this reunion as extensions of the network. Grant maintained the way some men maintain a garden, constantly, obsessively. Because the garden is the proof of who they are. Those men were not giving him what he needed. They were giving him distance. She recognized the particular body language of it. The slight lean away, the arms crossing, the eyes moving toward exits. She had seen it in professional settings when a client realized mid-meeting that they had made an error in judgment, the slow physical withdrawal that preceded the formal one. She had seen it in translation work when a publisher realized a contracted text was not what they had hoped. She had spent her career reading the language of bodies in rooms, and what she read now in the bodies of Grant Harlow's colleagues was simple and unambiguous. They were deciding how far away from him they needed to be. "He's losing them," she said to James. James was watching the same scene, with the same quality of detached observation. He gave everything. "He's been losing them for longer than tonight," he said. "Tonight is just when it became visible." "Will they cut ties completely?" "Publicly, yes, immediately." He took a sip of water. "Privately, they'll be calling their own attorneys before midnight." Men like that don't go down alone. They go down with a list of other people they can offer in exchange for their own soft landing. "That's cold." "That's accurate," he said. "I've been in enough operations where the difference between cold and accurate is what keeps people alive." I stopped apologizing for the distinction. Nora looked at the scene across the room and felt the strange double experience of watching something she had wanted to see for a very long time and finding that it did not feel the way she had expected it to. She had spent years carrying a quiet, heavy anger about the way these people had treated her and others like her. And now the structure was cracking in real time, and what she felt was not satisfaction exactly. It was something more complicated than that. Something that had to do with the cost of everything, with the fact that even necessary collapses left wreckage, and wreckage had a weight of its own. Then Sienna Harlow walked toward the podium. Not toward her husband. Not toward the exits. Toward the podium. The room did not immediately notice. Conversations continued. Someone near the front laughed at something. But Sienna walked with the particular focused direction of a woman who had made a decision and made it fast, and was going to execute it before she talked herself out of it. And she reached the podium, and she took the microphone from the stand with the ease of a woman who had held microphones before, who had chaired galas and fundraisers, and sat on boards where her voice was expected and accommodated. The room quieted. Grant saw her. His face did something sudden and uncontrolled, and then controlled itself again. Sienna looked at the room. She looked at it the way you look at something you have curated your entire life and are seeing clearly for the first time, and her expression was. Nora struggled for the right word. The way she struggled sometimes with a phrase in Romanian that didn't have a clean English equivalent. Her expression was the face of a woman standing at the exact edge of her own reinvention and not yet knowing which way she would fall. "I want to say something," Sienna said. Her voice was steady. "I want to say something that's not on the agenda." The alumni president, a small nervous man named Fletcher, who had been managing the evening with the anxious energy of someone running a controlled burn, looked at the stage with the expression of a man watching the controlled burn become something else. Sienna didn't look at him. She looked at the room. "Earlier tonight," she said, "my husband said something from this stage that was cruel. It was dressed up as a joke. Most cruelty is." She paused. "He made a joke at the expense of Nora Calloway, who is sitting at table 14, and everyone in this room laughed, and I laughed too. And I need to..." She stopped. The room was completely still, in the way that rooms go still when they understand that something unrehearsed is happening, something that doesn't belong to the genre of the evening, something that might be real. "I've known Nora since we were 16 years old," Sienna said, "and I have spent 20 years treating her as a person who didn't matter. Not with violence, nothing dramatic. Just a sustained, careful 20-year project of making her feel small. Of confirming for her over and over through every subtle instrument available to someone in my position that she was not worth full attention." Her voice was even. She was not crying. Nora had the impression that Sienna Harlow had decided some years ago that she would not cry in public, and the decision had become permanent. "I don't know exactly why I did that. I think I needed someone to be less than me. I think that's a terrible thing to need. And I think I've needed it for so long that I stopped seeing it as a need and started seeing it as a fact, like it was just true, like Nora was just less. And I want to say..." She looked toward table 14. She looked at Nora. Nora looked back. She did not make it easy. She did not offer the social grace of a forgiving expression, the small nod that would have released Sienna from the difficulty of the moment. She looked at her, and she waited. The way you wait at the edge of a very long translation for the sentence that will finally make sense of everything that came before. "I'm sorry," Sienna said. "That's inadequate. I know it's inadequate, but it's what I have." The room was silent. Then someone near the front began to clap. Hesitant at first, the kind of applause that asks itself whether it's appropriate before committing. Then more. Not the whole room. Not a standing ovation. But enough people real enough that the sound of it meant something. Grant Harlow did not clap. He stood near the bar where he had retreated, and he watched his wife at the podium with an expression that Nora could not fully read from this distance. And then he turned and walked toward the exit and did not come back. Sienna watched him go. She stood at the podium, and she watched him leave the room, and then she set the microphone back in the stand, and she stepped down from the platform, and she walked not to her table, not back into the performance. She walked toward the back of the room, toward the corner, toward table 14. Nora watched her come. Beside her, James was very still, not with the stillness of tension, but with the stillness of someone giving space to something that belongs to other people. Sienna stopped at the edge of the table. She looked like someone who had prepared a speech and used all of it at the podium, and now had nothing left but the unscripted version of herself which she had not accessed in public in a very long time. "I meant it," she said to Nora. "I know you have no reason to believe that." "I heard you," Nora said. "That's not the same as..." "No," Nora said. "It isn't." She looked at Sienna, at the face she had known since they were girls, at all the years layered beneath the current version. "But it's a start. And I'm 42 years old, Sienna. I don't need you to fix the last 20 years. I just needed you to stop." She paused. "So stop." Sienna nodded. A single serious nod. "All right." She didn't ask to sit down. She didn't extend the moment into something it wasn't. She turned and walked away, and that Nora thought was the most honest thing Sienna Harlow had done in a room full of people in a very long time. Ron Briggs exhaled loudly. "I need a drink," he announced to no one in particular and stood and went to find one. Patricia Yunt had put her business cards away entirely. She was looking at Nora with an expression that Nora recognized but rarely received simple, uncomplicated respect. "For what it's worth," Patricia said. "I've spent this entire reunion feeling like I was at the wrong table. I think I was at the right one." "I think so too," Nora said. James said nothing, but she felt his attention beside her steady and present. The way a fixed point is present, not intrusive, not demanding, just reliably there. It was Fletcher, the alumni president, who came to table 14 next, approaching, with the nervous energy of a man who has been managing someone else's event and watched it become something entirely outside his control. He was a small man in a too large suit, and he looked at Nora with the expression of someone who has realized belatedly that he has been complicit in something he should have prevented. "Ms. Calloway," he said, "on behalf of the association, I want to—" "Fletcher," she said, not unkindly. "You placed me at table 14. He went slightly pink. "The seating arrangements were intentional," she said. "I know. I knew when I sat down." She looked at him evenly. "I'm not interested in an apology from the association. I'm interested in what the association does next time. Whether the people who are assigned to the corner tables by the kitchen are placed there because someone decided they were irrelevant, or whether the process is actually blind." She tilted her head. "Is the process blind, Fletcher?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "No," he said finally. "It isn't." "Then that's the conversation worth having," she said. "Not tonight, but worth having." He nodded with the relief of a man given a concrete task instead of an impossible one, and retreated. James was watching her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just watching you work." "Work?" "You just redirected an apology into a structural critique and gave the man a path forward he could actually take," he said. "That's a skill. 20 years of translating difficult texts," she said. "You learn to find the usable version of things." He smiled. A real one this time, not the nearly smile she had seen earlier, but an actual full-formed smile, brief and unguarded, the kind that arrives when the defenses come down for just a moment, and it changed his face so completely and so quickly that she understood in that instant why he kept it private. It was the kind of smile that made you want to earn it again. "Tell me about the translations," he said. "Not what they are, what it's like, doing the work." She looked at him, slightly surprised. "You actually want to know?" "I asked, didn't I?" She considered. She had been asked about translation at parties before, at professional events on dates a decade ago that had not led anywhere worth going. She had learned to give the polished answer, the accessible version, the 90-second explanation that satisfied curiosity without demanding real attention. She had learned this because the real answer required a listener who was actually listening. She thought James Whitfield was actually listening. "It's like—" She stopped. Started again. "Imagine someone hands you a locked room. Not a room you can break into. A room you have to rebuild from the outside exactly board by board, until what you've built is indistinguishable from the inside. You never actually enter the room. You can only study the exterior and reconstruct what the inside must feel like." She paused. "Every language is a different kind of locked room. Hungarian is a locked room with no windows and a door that opens inward. Polish is a locked room with 17 keys and only one of them works today. Romanian is— What's Romanian?" "Romanian is a locked room that used to be a palace," she said. "You can see the original architecture under everything that was done to it later. It's beautiful and sad and very hard to hold in one hand." He was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "And you do this alone. Always alone. And the person whose room you've rebuilt, the author, they don't always know it's been done well," she said. "The Polish poet I translated 3 years ago, the one that won the PEN Award, the English translation won the PEN Award. He sent me a card, a handwritten card in Polish. He said—" She paused. He said reading his own work in my translation was like hearing his own voice played back to him from very far away. He said it was strange, and it was right, and it was the loneliest feeling he had ever felt that was also a comfort. She looked at the table. That card is the only professional recognition I have ever received that meant anything. Where is it? On my refrigerator, she said, under a magnet shaped like a Warsaw tram. He looked at her with something she couldn't name immediately. When she found the word for it, it surprised her. The word was reverence. Not romantic, not performative, the particular quality of attention a person gives to something they recognize as genuinely rare. Nora, he said. Yes. I need to tell you something about the invitation. She waited. Thomas Garrison, the man I told you about, the one who helped me, he knew about you, James said. She stared at him. Not personally. He didn't know you personally. But in the last year of his life, he was on the board of a small literary foundation, a grant foundation for independent translators, and he reviewed applications. James reached into the inner pocket of his dress jacket and produced a folded piece of paper, the kind of paper that had been carried carefully handled often. He set it on the table in front of her. He kept this. His daughter found it when she was going through his files after he died, and she gave it to me because she thought I should know the kind of man her father was, what he spent his time on. Nora looked at the paper without touching it. What is it? She said, though some part of her already knew. A letter of recommendation, James said, that he wrote, for a grant application, for a translator whose work he described. He paused and looked at the paper. He described her work as, quote, among the most precise and empathetic translation work being produced in the English language today, by a practitioner who has been consistently overlooked by every major recognition body and deserves immediate and substantial redress. Nora's hands were in her lap. She pressed them flat against her thighs. The application wasn't funded that year, James said. Budget cuts. The foundation folded 2 years later. Thomas died without knowing whether any of his recommendations had made a difference. He looked at her. The name on the application was Nora Calloway. The room continued around them, the clink of glasses, the sound of voices reconstructing a normal evening over the rubble of an abnormal one. The kitchen doors behind them opened and closed. Opened and closed. Nora picked up the letter. She unfolded it carefully, the way you handle something fragile, and she read it. She read it twice. The handwriting was old-fashioned and legible, the cursive of someone who had learned to write in an era when handwriting was still considered a form of character. The words were exactly what James had described, and more specific, precise. The words of a man who had actually read her translations, who had followed the footnotes and understood the choices and recognized what it cost to make them. A stranger. A man she had never met. Dead for 4 years. He had seen her. She folded the letter and she held it in both hands, and she did not cry, not because she was not moved, but because she had not cried in a very long time, and the machinery of it seemed to require more than she could spare in a room full of people. She held the letter, and she breathed. Why did you bring this tonight? She said. You could have. This didn't need to happen here. No, he said. It didn't. I wasn't planning to show you until... He stopped. I wasn't certain I would show you at all. I wasn't sure what the right thing was. His voice had changed slightly. Not much, but enough. And then Harlow made his joke, and I looked at your face while the room laughed, and I thought Thomas would have wanted her to know. Tonight, not later. Tonight. She looked at him. He helped you, she said. He helped me. And you came here tonight because of him. Yes. And you ended up at this table. By choice, he said. When I saw the seating chart, I saw where you were placed, and He stopped. I chose the corner, deliberately, because I could see from across the room that the corner was where the honest people were sitting. Nora thought about that for a long moment. About Thomas Garrison, who had been kind to a homeless young man, and separately had read the work of an invisible translator, and separately had been mourned by a daughter who had sent a Navy commander to a reunion with a folded letter in his jacket pocket. About the way good acts move through time in directions you cannot predict, touching people who will never know they were touched by the same source. About the way invisible work persists. The foundation that folded, she said. The Grant Foundation. What about it? Thomas's daughter. Does she have any interest in restarting it? James said. He looked at her with what was unmistakably interest. She's been looking for someone who would know how to rebuild it properly. She doesn't have the literary expertise. She has the contacts and the financial infrastructure, but she needs someone who understands the field, who knows who the overlooked practitioners are, who could evaluate applications with real knowledge. He paused. I told her I might meet someone tonight who could help with that. Nora stared at him. You didn't know me before tonight. No, he said. But I knew Thomas's letter, and I knew the field well enough to research the name on it before I came. He met her eyes. I read 2 of your translations, Nora. On the train down from Baltimore. I have been carrying that letter for 8 months, trying to figure out the right time and the right way. And then the invitation arrived, and your name was on the alumni list, and I thought, You thought it was a sign, she said. I thought it was logistics, he said. I'm not a sign person. I'm a planning person. The almost smile. But I'll admit the logistics were unusually convenient. From across the room, the sound of raised voices returned sharper this time. Grant Harlow had come back, not back into the party, but visible through the glass doors of the lobby, standing with 2 men in suits who had not been at the dinner, and who had the particular upright posture of people who were not here socially. One of them had a badge visible on his belt. The room noticed. Nora noticed. James noticed and said nothing. Those aren't party guests, she said. No, James said. Did you? They were already coming, he said. I didn't arrange that. Rourke's cooperation arranged that. All I did was ensure the timing aligned with tonight so that... He stopped. So that if Harlow was going to do what he's been doing his entire career, he would do it in front of the people he's been performing for. So that the performance and the reality would occupy the same room at the same time. Through the glass doors, Grant Harlow was talking to the suited men. His posture was still composed, still the architecture of a man who controlled rooms. But it was an architecture under load, visibly straining at the points where the weight exceeded the design. Sienna was not there. Sienna was sitting alone at table 2. Her champagne untouched, looking at nothing with the focused attention of someone reorganizing everything they know about their own life. Nora looked at her and felt unexpectedly something that was not quite pity and not quite solidarity, but lived in the territory between them. Sienna had built her life on Grant the way you build on ground that turns out to be unstable. The building was hers. She had lived in it and tended it and identified herself with it completely. That it was built on something rotten was not entirely a thing she had known or chosen or endorsed. Or maybe she had known in the way you know things you have decided not to look at directly. Either way, the building was coming down. She's going to be all right, Patricia Yunt said quietly, following Nora's gaze. Sienna, I mean. She's tough. Under all of... She gestured vaguely. All of that. She's genuinely tough. I know she is, Nora said. I've known her since we were 16. Then you know more about her than most people in this room. I know the version she became, Nora said. I don't know if she knows the version she was. She paused. I think she might be starting to. The doors from the lobby opened, and a hotel manager came in, accompanied by one of the suited men, and they spoke in low voices to the alumni president, and Fletcher's face went through 3 distinct expressions in about 4 seconds. He nodded. He went to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, Fletcher said with the voice of a man performing calm he does not feel. We're going to take a brief intermission. There are some matters that require our attention. Please enjoy the bar, and we'll... He looked at his notes, which did not contain anything useful for this situation. We'll reconvene shortly. The room began to fragment into conversation clusters, everyone turning to their neighbor with the same question, wearing different words. What's happening? Did you see? Is that a federal? Did Grant? Nora sat at table 14 and did not fragment. James sat beside her and did not fragment. They were the stillest people in the room, and Nora thought about the strange comfort of two people who knew how to be still in the middle of things falling apart. The Navy had given him that. Translation had given her something like it. The practice of maintaining your precision when the material was resisting you, when the text was obstinate, or the deadline was close, or the meaning was slipping, of staying with the work and not panicking. "What happens to us now?" she said. She hadn't meant to say it that way. The word us arrived before she had vetted it. She didn't take it back. James looked at her. He looked at her the way he looked at everything, directly, honestly, with the particular attentiveness of a man who has learned that paying real attention is not a luxury, but a necessity. And then he said something she would carry with her for a very long time, in the same interior place where she carried the Polish poet's letter from Warsaw. "I don't know," he said, "but I think it would be worth finding out." The room moved around them, and the evening continued to collapse and reconstruct itself in real time. And two people who had spent their lives being overlooked sat in the corner of a ballroom by the kitchen doors and looked at each other honestly, and felt for the first time in a long time completely seen. The intermission did not feel like an intermission. It felt like the pause between a lightning strike and the thunder, that particular held breath moment when you know the sound is coming but haven't yet felt it in your chest. The room had broken into its clusters, people standing in tight circles with their drinks and their phones and their carefully modulated expressions of concern, but underneath all of it was something rawer and less managed. The performance of the evening had cracked open, and what was visible inside it now was just people. Ordinary people with ordinary fears, wondering how close they had been standing to something they hadn't known was dangerous. Nora watched it from table 14. She was good at watching. She had always been good at watching. The difference tonight was that she was watching without the familiar weight of her own invisibility pressing down on her, without the reflexive self-erasure that had been her social survival strategy for 2 decades. She was just watching. Clearly. The way you see a text clearly once you've found the key to it, once the language stops resisting and starts revealing. James had gone to the bar to get water, real water, not the social prop of a drink, and she watched him move through the room the way she had been watching him all evening. The particular quality of his presence in a space. The way people stepped aside for him without quite knowing why, the unconscious social accommodation of someone who occupied their own ground so completely that the space simply arranged itself around them. The Navy uniform helped, but it wasn't only the uniform. It was something anterior to the uniform, something the uniform had found and formalized rather than created. Ron Briggs had come back from the bar and was now standing near the lobby doors with a bourbon in his hand, watching the suited men through the glass with the fascinated discomfort of someone watching an accident reconstruction on the highway. He came back to the table when he saw James returning. "So they're actually," he said, sitting down, gesturing vaguely toward the lobby. "Like this is actually—" "It appears so," James said, setting 2 glasses of water on the table and sitting down. "I mean, I've known Grant Harlow peripherally for years," Ron said, "through the alumni network. He's been on the association board. He gave the keynote at the 15-year reunion. He shook his head. "He seemed credible," James said. "Yes, that's the specific skill set," James said. "Not competence, not genuine achievement, credibility, the performance of reliability. Men like that are very good at calibrating their presentation to the expectations of their audience. They give people exactly what those people need to see in order to trust them." He looked at his water glass. "I've encountered it in the field. The most dangerous informants are never the ones who seem suspicious. They're the ones who seem trustworthy." Ron absorbed this. "How did you know about Harlow specifically?" "I didn't initially," James said. "I knew about Daniel Rourke because of Thomas Garrison. Thomas had a connection to someone who had been defrauded by the Maryland Project. One of the early investors. Thomas spent the last 2 years of his life trying to help that investor recover what he'd lost, which is how he became aware of the federal investigation, which is how his name ended up in a case file I was asked to review by someone who knew I was good at pattern analysis." He paused. The connection to Harlow was in the documentation. It took time to verify, but once it was verified, it was clear. The question was timing. "And you timed it for tonight," Ron said. "Tonight was already scheduled," James said. "I arrived for a different reason. The timing of the federal contact I facilitated that. I made a call this afternoon to someone I trust in the relevant office, and I told them where Harlow would be tonight and who would be in the room with him." He looked at Ron steadily. "I told them it was important that it happen publicly, that the people who had benefited from proximity to this man should see in the same room and at the same time what proximity had actually cost them." Ron was quiet for a long moment. That's a hard thing to do deliberately." "Yes," James said simply. "Why, you could have just reported the information. Let the process work. Why come here? Why make it public?" James said. "Yes." James looked at the room, at the clusters of people, the low, urgent conversations, the evening reconstructing itself around a new reality. Because men like Grant Harlow have operated in rooms like this one their entire careers. Rooms where the social contract protects them, where the shared investment in the appearance of success means no one asks the questions that would disturb it. Where being credible is the same as being good. His voice didn't change in temperature, but it changed in weight, the way water changes when it deepens. Thomas Garrison grew up in a room like this one. He came from this world. And he left it. And he spent the rest of his life doing small, invisible things for people who couldn't get into rooms like this one. And nobody in this room knew that about him. Nobody celebrated it. It didn't appear in his alumni profile. He picked up his water glass. "I thought the room should see at least once the cost of the story it's been telling itself." Nora had been listening to this quietly, the way she listened to everything, not passively, but with the active, absorbing attention that was the foundation of her work. She was listening, and she was also thinking about Thomas Garrison, whom she had never met, who had read her work in the last year of his life and written 11 sentences about it in careful cursive on paper that had traveled from his files to his daughter's hands, to a Navy commander's jacket pocket, to this table by the kitchen doors. She was thinking about the way good things move through the world, how they travel through people who will never meet each other, connecting lives in patterns that are only visible in retrospect if they are visible at all. "I want to meet his daughter," Nora said. Both men looked at her. "Thomas's daughter," she said. "The one who gave you the letter. The one who wants to restart the foundation." "Margaret," James said. "Margaret Garrison. She lives in Annapolis." "I want to meet her," Nora said. "Not about the foundation, not initially. Just, I want to meet her. I want to tell her that her father's 11 sentences about my work are the most important professional recognition I have ever received, and that they're on my refrigerator under a magnet, and that they kept me going through a translation last winter that I was ready to abandon." She paused. She should know that her father's attention mattered, even after he was gone. Especially after he was gone. James looked at her with the expression she had begun to recognize, that small, almost invisible adjustment around the eyes that meant he was moved and would not perform being moved. "I'll give you her number," he said. "Thank you." "She'll want to meet you," he said. "She's been hoping she asked me to find you. Not just to show you the letter, to find you. She wanted to know what happened to the translator her father believed in." Nora looked at the table, at the white linen slightly disturbed now by the evening's events, a water ring near her glass, a small fold where the tablecloth had been nudged. "And what did you tell her when you found me?" "I told her I'd report back," he said. "I haven't had a chance yet." "What will you tell her?" He was quiet for a moment, and she felt his pause, the way you feel the pause before a sentence in a foreign language that you've been struggling to understand suddenly becomes clear as a kind of held breath, a moment of almost, "I'll tell her," he said, "that her father was right about everything." The kitchen doors opened behind them, and a server emerged with a tray of coffee and dessert, the evening's scheduled programming continuing stubbornly alongside its own unraveling. The server set cups on the table with practiced efficiency and retreated, and the small, ordinary gesture of it, coffee at 9:30 in the evening in a hotel ballroom, was so normal against the background of everything else that Nora almost laughed. She picked up her cup. James picked up his. They drank coffee in the corner by the kitchen, and the room continued to deal with itself around them. It was Patricia Yunt who first noticed Sienna moving. "She's going to him," Patricia said quietly, nodding toward the lobby. Nora turned. Sienna Harlow had stood from table 2 and was walking toward the lobby doors with the focused direction she had used earlier going to the podium. But this was different. This was not the direction of a decision made fast before courage ran out. This was slower, more deliberate. The walk of a woman who has thought something through completely and is now simply following it to its conclusion. She pushed through the lobby doors. Through the glass they could see her approach Grant, who was still with the suited men. The conversation now clearly formal, the body language of all parties unmistakably official. They watched Sienna walk up to Grant's side and say something to him. They watched Grant turn to her with an expression that was difficult to read through glass and distance, but that contained something Nora had not expected to see on that particular face: shame. Grant Harlow looked at his wife with shame, and Sienna, who had come. Nora thought who had come to stand beside him, to present the united front that women in her position learned early and practiced constantly. Sienna looked at him for a long moment, and then she shook her head, and she turned around and came back inside. She walked back through the ballroom without stopping, without looking at anyone, and she went through a side door near the far wall, and she was gone. Nobody said anything about it. The room processed it in silence, the way rooms process things that they don't have a social script for. And then the conversations resumed at a slightly different pitch, slightly lower, slightly more honest, and the evening continued. "Good for her," Patricia said with a decisiveness that surprised everyone at the table, including herself. She picked up her coffee. "That's a hard thing to do. In public. In front of all of this." She looked at Nora. "You know what I kept thinking watching everything tonight?" "What?" "That we all came here to perform 20 years of success," Patricia said. "And instead we got 20 years of truth. And the truth is better. It's uncomfortable, and it's messy, and half the people in this room are going to spend the drive home completely rethinking their lives. But it's better." She set her cup down. "I'm going to stop handing out business cards." "That might be a good idea," Ron said. "I hand them out because I'm afraid of not being taken seriously," Patricia said with the bluntness of someone who has just decided that tonight is the night for bluntness. "I do it because I think if I give you the card, you'll see the title, and if you see the title, you'll think I matter. And I've been doing that for 20 years, and it doesn't work, and I'm going to stop." She looked at Nora. "How did you stop being afraid of not being taken seriously?" Nora considered this. It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer, not the polished version. "I didn't stop being afraid," she said. "I just got tired of letting the fear make my decisions. There's a difference." She looked at her coffee. "I was afraid tonight. Walking into this room, sitting down at this table. Every minute that Sienna came to measure herself against me, I was afraid the whole time." She paused. "But I stayed. And I didn't perform anything that wasn't true. And somewhere in the middle of staying and not performing, the fear became background noise instead of the main event." Patricia nodded slowly. "That's..." She stopped. "That's actually useful. I expected something more inspiring." "Fear doesn't get inspiring," Nora said. "It just gets manageable. That's enough." "That's enough," Patricia agreed. James was listening to this with the particular quality of attention he gave to things that confirmed something he had already understood. He looked at Nora. "In the Navy," he said, "we had a phrase. We said brave is not no fear. Brave is deciding the mission is more important than the fear." He paused. "For 20 years your mission was the work, the translations, staying with it when no one was watching and no one was crediting you, and the fear said you were wasting your time." He looked at her steadily. "That's brave, Nora. By any definition, that matters." She looked at him across the table and felt the peculiar vertigo of being seen accurately by someone who has no investment in the version of you that you've been maintaining for other people's comfort. It was disorienting. It was also, she thought, the closest thing to freedom she had felt in a very long time. "You said something earlier," she said, "about being homeless for a period." He looked at her. "Yes. Tell me," she said. "Not because I need to know, because I think you need to say it. In a room where people spent all evening performing the distance between themselves and anything that looked like failure." She held his gaze. "Tell me what that was like." He was quiet. Not the quiet of reluctance, but the quiet of a man choosing his words with the care they deserve. "I was 22, he said. "I had grown up without much structure. My mother was gone by the time I was 12. My father was present in the technical sense of the word. Beyond that," he shook his head. "I left home at 17, and I worked whatever work I could find, and I was fine more or less for a few years. And then I wasn't. And then I was in a city I'd moved to for a job that disappeared, and I had $37 in a backpack, and I spent 6 weeks alternating between a shelter in Georgetown and a park bench, depending on the bed availability." He said it the way he said everything, not for effect, not to elicit a particular response, just plainly, with the precision of someone who has processed a thing fully enough to report it accurately. I was not a person who asked for help easily. I still am not. And I had convinced myself that the situation was temporary, and I could manage it, and I would find a way through on my own. "But you didn't," Nora said. "Thomas Garrison found me," he said. "He wasn't looking for me specifically. He worked one evening a month at the Georgetown shelter. He wasn't doing it for social credit or tax reasons, or because his firm required community service hours. He did it because he thought it was the right use of a Thursday evening." The almost smile came and went. "He sat across a table from me, and he asked me what I was good at, and he actually waited for the answer. He didn't assume. He didn't project. He asked, and he waited, and he listened." James looked at the table. "I told him I was good at reading people, at understanding how situations worked, at staying calm when things were bad." He paused. He said those were exactly the qualities the Navy needed, and that if I was interested, he knew a recruiter. "And you went?" "I went the next day," James said. "Not because I trusted him. Because I had nothing to lose, and he was the first person in 6 weeks who had spoken to me like I was a complete person rather than a problem to be processed." He looked up. "That's all it took. One person. One conversation. One human being who looked at me without deciding in advance what category I belonged in." He paused. "Thomas Garrison looked at people the way you look at texts. He didn't impose meaning. He waited for it to reveal itself." Nora felt that land somewhere specific and deep. "He sounds like someone I would have liked," she said. "Everyone who knew him liked him," James said. He was the kind of person who makes you embarrassed by the amount of time you spend on performance. Because he never did. Never. In a world full of people performing, Thomas Garrison just was. Whatever he was, in whatever room he was in, without alteration or adjustment. "Like you," Nora said. He looked at her. "Like you," she said again. "You walked into this room in full dress uniform, and you sat in the corner, and you ate your dinner, and you said what needed to be said, and you let everything else take care of itself." She held his gaze. "You're not performing anything, James. You haven't been all evening. In a room where every single other person has been performing something, you've just been," she found the word, "present." He looked at her for a long moment, with those eyes that didn't deflect and didn't perform, and then he said very quietly, "You too." Ron cleared his throat. Not rudely. The gentle throat clearing of a man who recognizes he is in the presence of something private and is trying to give it room. He picked up his bourbon and looked at the lobby doors, where Grant Harlow was no longer visible. "I should tell you both something," Ron said. They looked at him. "I knew," he said, "about the seating chart, that Nora was put in the back corner deliberately." He looked at the table. "I didn't arrange it. But I was at the meeting where it was discussed, where someone, I won't say who, said that the reunion was about celebrating achievement, and some of the alumni might make the event feel... He stopped. They used the word inconsistent, with the tone they were going for. He looked at Nora. I didn't object. I sat in that meeting, and I didn't say a word because I didn't want to be the person who made things uncomfortable. He set his drink down. I've been uncomfortable about it since I sat down tonight, and I need you to know that I knew, and I didn't stop it, and I'm sorry. Nora looked at him for a long time. Ron, she said, thank you for telling me. That's it. What else would you like? He looked uncertain. I don't know. More anger, maybe. I think I deserve more anger. Probably, she said. But I'm tired of spending my anger on people who could have done something and didn't. There are too many of them, and the anger is expensive. She looked at him. What I'd like is for you to be the person who objects next time. In the next meeting. The next time someone uses the word inconsistent as a synonym for less than. Object. She paused. Can you do that? Yes, he said, without hesitation. Yes, I can do that. Then we're all right, she said. It was at that moment that the lobby doors opened again and the scene beyond them had changed. Grant Harlow was gone, not through the main entrance, but through a side door, escorted the suited men, moving with the particular purposeful calm of people whose job had progressed to its next phase. Two other men, senior-looking silver-haired men who had been at tables 3 and 4, and who Nora now understood were more deeply connected to Grant's business than the evening's surface had suggested, were now also in conversation with people who had not been at the dinner. Fletcher appeared at the edge of the room and made a small, helpless gesture to no one in particular. The evening, Patricia Yunt said dryly, has taken a turn. Several turns, Ron said. Are we going to be questioned? Patricia asked James with the directness of a woman who has decided that directness is the most efficient path through confusion. Possibly, James said, as witnesses to this evening's events. It's routine in situations like this. They'll want to establish what was said and who was present. He looked at her. Tell the truth. That's all they want and all you need to do. What did you say? She asked. If they ask what you said tonight, from the table. I'll tell them exactly what I said, James said. I wasn't operating in any official capacity tonight. I was a private citizen at a private event who spoke truthfully about matters of public record. He paused. Everything I said about Harlow's business arrangements is documented in federal case files that are now part of a formal investigation. I didn't reveal classified information. I didn't manufacture anything. I stated documented facts in a room full of people who had a right to know them. He looked at Ron. That's not illegal. That's citizenship. Ron let out a long breath. Remind me never to get on your bad side. I don't have a bad side, James said. I have a side that understands the difference between people who deserve protection and people who deserve consequences, and I act accordingly. The room around them had thinned. People were leaving, some with the purposeful exit of people who have decided they don't want to be present for whatever comes next. Others with the reluctant departure of people who want to stay, but can't think of a reason that wouldn't look ghoulish. Fletcher was at the door shaking hands with departing guests, with the mechanical persistence of a man performing his function because his function is all that remains. Table 14 had become, Nora realized, the most occupied it had been all evening. Ron was there. Patricia was there. Two of the younger couples had drifted back from their earlier retreat and were now sitting with the quality of people who have decided that Table 14 is unexpectedly where they want to be for the remainder of the evening. She thought about that, about corners, about the geography of rooms again, about how the table in the back by the kitchen door had over the course of this evening become the center of what was real. James, she said. Yes. The letter. Can I keep it? He looked at her. It was always yours, he said. Thomas wrote it about you. I was just the courier. She folded it carefully and put it in her small clutch bag next to her keys and her phone and a tube of lip balm and the other ordinary objects of an ordinary life. She put it there carefully, the way you place something where you will be able to find it again, where you will know exactly where it is when you need it. Then she looked up and found James watching her with an expression she recognized this time without having to search for words. It was the expression of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has just successfully delivered it to the place it was always meant to go. Not relief exactly. Something quieter than relief and more permanent. The completion of something that mattered. Your daughter, Nora said. Lily. Yes. Does she know what you do? Why you go to things like this? She knows I help people sometimes, he said. She knows that sometimes helping people means doing things that are hard or uncomfortable or that take you away from home on a Thursday evening. He paused. She asked me last week what I was going to this dinner for. I told her I was going to find someone who deserved to be found. He looked at Nora. She said, the full smile came briefly wholly. She said, make sure you actually find them, Daddy. Don't just look. Nora held that. She held it the way she held the best lines she translated, not analyzing them, not working them, just letting them be what they were. A 7-year-old girl's instructions to her father, issued with the absolute confidence of someone who has not yet learned to doubt the possibility of finding what you look for. Make sure you actually find them. Don't just look. She's brilliant, Nora said. She's relentless, James said. I already told you that. Same thing, Nora said. And something in the room shifted again, not dramatically. Not with the seismic force of the earlier shifts, but quietly and permanently, the way the last piece of a translation falls into place. Not with fanfare. With the simple, clean recognition of a thing becoming what it was always meant to be. Outside the lobby windows, the city continued. Traffic moved. Lights changed. The Grand Meridian Hotel stood at the edge of downtown the way it always had, indifferent to the small revolutions that occurred inside it, the private collapses and recoveries of ordinary people in extraordinary moments. The letters carried in jacket pockets across years, the words finally said out loud that had been waiting for 20 years to be spoken. And at table 14 in the corner of the room where the honest people had ended up, 2 people who had spent their lives doing invisible work sat with their coffee going cold and said nothing for a while, because sometimes the most important things don't need to be translated at all. They just need to be witnessed. Part 5. Fan kết thúc. Lưu ý viết 4.200 đến 4.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề. Tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi. Kẻ theo ngôi thứ 3 giữ độ kịch tính không viết lan man. Kết thúc dùng câu khẳng định mạnh để khép lại câu chuyện rõ ràng, trọn vẹn. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang mực document. Viết, đúng sổ tự tạo yêu cầu không được ít hơn 4.200 từ. 11-19 part, 5 What remains when the performance ends. The last guests left the Grand Meridian at 11:43. Nora knew the time because she had looked at her phone when Fletcher finally turned off the podium microphone and the ambient music that had been playing underneath the entire evening. That particular brand of tasteful, forgettable hotel jazz that exists to fill silence without drawing attention, went quiet. 11:43. She had arrived at 7:14. 4.5 hours. She had lived more in 4.5 hours than she had lived in some entire years. The ballroom was not empty yet. The hotel staff moved through it with the efficient, practiced rhythm of people dismantling an event, clearing glasses and folding napkins, and collapsing the architecture of an evening back into the neutral space that would become something else tomorrow. Fletcher stood near the entrance with his clipboard signing off on something with the concentrated relief of a man whose crisis had passed and who was now dealing only with paperwork, which was a crisis, he understood. Table 14 had held longer than most. Ron Briggs had left at 11:15, shaking James's hand with the particular grip of a man who has revised his opinion of another person substantially upward and wants the handshake to communicate that. He shook Nora's hand too, and then thought better of it and hugged her briefly, which surprised them both. And then he left without looking back, the way people leave, when they're afraid that looking back will undo something they need to hold on to. Patricia Yunt had gone a few minutes later, having given Nora her business card. The last one, she said, the very last one, and then she was going to have new ones printed without the title and only her name and her direct line, because she was done letting a job title speak for her before she got the chance to speak for herself. She had hugged James too, which had clearly surprised him more than it surprised anyone else, and she had said with the directness she had been practicing all evening, "You're a good man, Commander. Your daughter is lucky." And then she was gone. The younger couples had drifted out in pairs quieter than they had arrived, with the particular quality of people who have witnessed something they will be processing for weeks. Now it was only Nora and James at table 14 and a hotel staff member named Marco. His name tag said Marco, and he moved through the room with the cheerful competence of someone who had seen stranger evenings than this one, and expected to see stranger ones still, who was collecting centerpieces from the empty tables and stacking them on a cart. "We should go," Nora said. "Yes," James said. Neither of them moved. She looked at the room. At what remained of it, the white linens going soft at the edges, the half-empty glasses, the centerpieces that Marco had not yet reached. The podium where Grant Harlow had stood and told a joke and started a chain of events that would occupy federal attorneys and financial journalists and former business associates for the better part of the next 2 years. The platform where Sienna had stood afterward with the microphone and done the harder, braver, less calculating thing. "What happens to Sienna?" Nora said. Not to James specifically, more to the room, to the question itself. James considered it seriously, the way he considered everything. "She has resources of her own," he said. "Family money independent of Grant's firm. She's educated and she's socially connected, and she's tougher than she's allowed herself to be for a very long time." He paused. "What happens to her is mostly up to her. The question is whether tonight was enough to make her choose differently." She turned away from him, Nora said. "At the lobby. She walked away." "That's a start," he said. "It's a significant start. But walking away in a hotel lobby in front of witnesses is one thing. What she does Monday morning, and the Monday after that, and the Monday after that." He shook his head. "That's where character actually lives, in the Mondays." Nora thought about her own Mondays. 20 years of them. The small apartment above the dry cleaners, the morning coffee. The open document, the foreign text waiting to be unlocked. The Mondays when the work was going well, and the language was cooperating, and the meaning was flowing cleanly from one form to another. The Mondays when it wasn't, and she sat for 3 hours and produced 4 sentences and deleted 2 of them. The Mondays after a rejection or a contract that didn't materialize, or a review that praised the author and forgot to mention the translator entirely. She had shown up for all of them. "In the Mondays," she said. "Yes, that's right." James reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small card. Not a business card, a plain white index card with a phone number written on it in the same careful, deliberate handwriting she had seen on Thomas Garrison's letter. He set it on the table in front of her. "Margaret Garrison," he said. "Her number. She lives in Annapolis. She's expecting you might call." Nora picked up the card. "You already told her." "I sent her a message during the intermission," he said. "I told her I had found the person Thomas wrote about. I told her she should expect a call. You were confident I'd want to call." "I was hopeful," he said. And then with the ghost of the full smile, "I was also fairly confident." She looked at the card. At the number. At Margaret Garrison's name written in James Whitfield's handwriting, which was its own kind of translation, one person's careful attention carrying another person's name through time to someone who needed to receive it. "James," she said. "Yes. The other night on the train from Baltimore. The 2 translations you read." "Yes." "Which ones?" "The Kowalski novel," he said. "The one about the beekeeper, and the Moldovan collection, the short stories." She looked at him. "Those are my 2 hardest," she said. "The Kowalski was 3 years of work. The Moldovan collection I almost quit halfway through. The dialect was, there's a regional dialect in the northern part of Moldova that has no established translation conventions. I had to invent conventions, and then be consistent with them across 22 stories, without the reader ever knowing there were no rules before I made them. I didn't know that, he said, reading it. That's the point, she said. If you can tell I failed. I couldn't tell, he said. What I could tell was that the stories felt inevitable, like they had always existed in English, and I was simply encountering them for the first time. He paused. I didn't know enough to know that was a technical achievement until you just described it. But I felt it. He looked at her. That's what Thomas meant, in the letter. He said your work felt inevitable. That's the word he used. Nora pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry. She had decided this an hour ago, and the decision was holding. But it was holding the way decisions hold when they are being tested continuously and have been winning so far, but are not certain of winning indefinitely. He used that exact word, she said. Inevitable, James confirmed. Twice. She breathed. In, out. The way you breathe when you are keeping something from spilling. Okay, she said. Okay. Marco, the staff member, reached their table with his cart. He looked at them with the pleasant neutral expression of a man who has learned not to read hotel guests and their emotional states. Are you finished, ma'am, sir? Yes, James said. Thank you, Marco. Marco collected the centerpiece and moved on, and the table was suddenly just a table, just a white linen surface with 2 water glasses and 2 cold coffee cups, and a small card with a phone number on it. The entire geography of the evening reduced to its essentials. They stood. They stood at the same time without discussing it, the way 2 people stand when they have been occupying the same rhythm long enough that the rhythm has synchronized. James picked up his cover, the flat-brimmed hat, from the table where it had rested all evening and fitted it with the automatic precision of a man who has performed this gesture 10,000 times. He settled it with a small adjustment, and the uniform became complete again. And Nora thought about the 22-year-old man with $37 and a backpack, and the particular stubborn dignity of a person who refuses to accept a lesser version of themselves as the final version. And she thought about the Thomas Garrison, who had sat across a table from him and asked what he was good at, and waited for the answer. She thought about the long, invisible chain of good acts that had led to this corner table, and this evening, and this man standing in a Navy uniform in the Grand Meridian Hotel at 11:45 on an ordinary Thursday night. Walk me out, she said. Yes, he said. They walked out through the thinning ballroom, past Fletcher, with his clipboard, past the last of the hotel staff folding up the evening. Into the lobby, which was quiet. Now, the daytime business of the hotel reasserting itself over the evening's event. A couple checking in at the front desk. A solitary guest waiting for the elevator with a rolling suitcase, a bellhop passing through with the composed invisibility of someone who is paid to be background. The lobby doors opened, and they stepped outside, and the city received them. It was a clear night, the kind that arrives in Washington after a day of suppressed humidity, when the air finally releases what it's been holding, and becomes for a few hours simply cool and clean and possible. The street was quieter than it had been when Nora arrived. The dinner crowd thinned, the evening traffic reduced to the particular steady stream of people who had places to be at midnight. Taxis. A couple walking a dog. The orange glow of a food truck 2 blocks down doing the last business of the evening. They stood on the steps of the Grand Meridian, and neither of them moved toward the street. My car is in the garage on 17th, Nora said. I'm taking the metro to Union Station, he said. Train back to Baltimore at 12:40. You're going back tonight. Lily has school tomorrow, he said. Mrs. Pacheco will stay until I'm home, but I don't like to leave it past midnight. She looked at him, at the uniform and the cover and the 3 gold stripes and the face of a man who had built himself from almost nothing into something real and permanent and good, and who was going home tonight on the 12:40 train because his 7-year-old daughter had school in the morning, and he did not like to keep Mrs. Pacheco past midnight. She's lucky, Nora said. Your daughter, to have you. She'd tell you the luck runs the other way, he said. She tells me that regularly, with full confidence. The full smile brief and real. She's 7. She still believes everything is possible, and everyone she loves is exactly who they should be. I try to be the person she thinks I am." He paused. "It's useful, having someone who believes in the version of you that you're still working toward." Nora thought about that. About the versions of herself she had been working toward over 20 years quietly, without an audience, in the small apartment above the dry cleaners, with the foreign texts and the Warsaw tram magnet and the single handwritten card from a Polish poet. The version who showed up for the Mondays. The version who did the work without the credit. The version who carried it all without being credited, without being seen, without being given a table anywhere near the front of the room. The version who had sat at table 14 tonight and held Sienna Harlow's gaze until Sienna looked away. "I've been working toward a version of myself for 20 years, she said. "I think I met her tonight." James looked at her. "How does she seem?" "Tired," Nora said. "But good." She paused. "Better than I expected." "Good is enough," he said. "Tired is honest." A taxi passed on the street below them, its light on available. Neither of them moved to flag it. "The foundation," she said. "If Margaret and I talk, if we decide to try to restart it, it's a real thing you think could work." "Thomas built it from nothing with a small bequest and 3 years of his own time," James said. "He had 12 grantees in the first 2 years, all overlooked practitioners in literary fields with no other institutional support. 3 of them have gone on to significant national recognition." He paused. "The infrastructure still exists legally. The board was dissolved, but the entity wasn't. It would need a chair who understood the field and had the credibility to evaluate applications and attract donations. It would need someone who knew what it meant to do invisible work and could recognize it in others." He held her gaze. It would need someone who had been doing exactly that for 20 years. She looked at the street, at the city that had been going about its business all evening, while her world was reorganizing itself inside a hotel ballroom, at the ordinary, continuing, indifferent life of a city at midnight. "I've never run anything," she said. "Thomas hadn't either," he said. When he started. "I don't know anything about grant administration." "Margaret does," he said. "She has an MBA, and she spent 5 years at a nonprofit before she moved to Annapolis. She knows the operations. She needs the substance." He paused. "You're the substance, Nora." She had been called many things in 20 years. Quiet, reliable, competent in the particular way that becomes invisible. She had been called good occasionally in reviews that were primarily about the author. She had been called a consummate professional by clients who meant it as a compliment, and did not notice it was also a form of erasure, reducing a person to their function, their professional surface, the thing they produced rather than the person who produced it. She had never been called the substance. "Call Margaret," James said. "This week. Don't wait until it makes more sense, or until you feel more prepared, or until the timing is better. Call her this week." "Is that an order, Commander?" "It's a recommendation," he said. "From someone who waited 3 years longer than he should have to do something he knew was right, and learned that waiting doesn't improve the situation. It just extends it." "What did you wait 3 years to do?" He looked at the street, at the quiet midnight city. "To tell my daughter the truth about her mother," he said. "About who she was. Not the protected version, not the age-appropriate version, but the real version. A woman who was complicated and brilliant and deeply kind, and who left too early, and who would have been exactly the mother Lily deserved." He paused. "Lily asked me direct questions. She always asks direct questions, and I kept giving her the careful version because I thought I was protecting her." He stopped. "When I finally told her the truth, she looked at me for a long time, and then she said, 'I already knew most of that, Daddy. I was waiting for you to know I could handle it.'" Nora was very still. 7 years old, she said. 7 years old, he confirmed. She was 6 when she said it. The almost smile with more behind it than usual. "Relentless." "Relentless," Nora agreed. She looked at him in the clear night air on the steps of the Grand Meridian Hotel in his navy dress blues, with his cover on, and his 3 gold stripes catching the light from the lobby doors. and she thought about all the things she had translated over 20 years. All the rooms she had unlocked without entering. All the meanings she had carried from one language to another without anyone watching, without anyone crediting the weight of what was being carried. She thought about a 7-year-old girl telling her father, "I was waiting for you to know I could handle it." She thought about Thomas Garrison writing 11 sentences in careful cursive about a translator whose name was buried in small print on a copyright page. She thought about the way good things travel through the world invisibly through people who will never meet, connecting in patterns that only become visible when one of the threads pulls taut. "James," she said. "Yes, I want to meet Lily." He looked at her, the full attention, the eyes that didn't deflect. "She'd like you," he said. "She'd ask you approximately 40 questions about translation in the first 10 minutes, and then she'd ask if you wanted to see her drawings, and then she'd tell you that her father talks in his sleep sometimes, which is both true and something I wish she wouldn't tell people." Nora laughed, a full one, real and unguarded, the kind she hadn't produced all evening. It surprised her, the way the real laughs always do, arriving before you've decided to let them, bypassing the filter entirely. "I want to meet her anyway," she said. "Then you will," he said. Simply. As though it were already decided. As though the decision had been made somewhere earlier in the evening and was only now being stated aloud. She nodded. A silence fell between them that was not uncomfortable. The particular silence of two people who have said the necessary things, and are now simply being present together at the end of a long evening on the steps of a hotel in a clear night, in a city that has been going on without them, and will continue to go on without them, and has no idea what occurred inside the building behind them. "Thank you," she said, "for sitting down at table 14. "It was the right table," he said. "Everyone else thought it was the wrong one." "Everyone else was wrong," he said. "Table 14 was where the honest people were, the corner by the kitchen. In my experience, that's always where the honest people end up, because the honest people don't fight for the front tables. They sit where they're placed, and they do the work, and they wait." He paused. "The problem is the waiting." "What's the solution?" "Stop waiting," he said. "That's it. That's the whole solution. Stop waiting for the room to notice you, and start deciding that your work is worth doing, whether the room notices or not. And then one day," he looked at her steadily, "one day, the room runs out of other options, and it turns around, and there you are. And everything you built in the invisible years is still standing, because it was built for real, not for the room." She looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had been homeless and become a commander, who had raised a daughter alone after devastating loss, who had carried a dead man's letter in his jacket pocket for 8 months because the debt of a good act is never fully discharged, who had sat in the corner of a ballroom by the kitchen doors and changed the entire evening without raising his voice above the level of ordinary conversation. "I built it for real," she said. 20 years of it." "I know," he said. "I read it on the train." She reached into her clutch bag, and her hand found the folded letter before it found anything else. "The way your hand finds the thing you need when you know exactly where you put it." "Go catch your train," she said. "Don't keep Mrs. Pacheco past midnight." "Call Margaret Garrison this week," he said. "Don't wait until it makes more sense." "It'll never make more sense," she said. "No," he said. "It won't." He came down 2 steps, and he stopped, and he looked at her, and she looked at him. And what passed between them in that look was not something that needed translation, because it was already in the only language that was never locked. The language that requires no conventions, and no invented rules, and no careful reader to carry it from one form to another. It was simply there, simply true. The way the most important things are, when you finally stop performing around them. He touched the brim of his cover, a small, precise gesture, formal and genuine at the same time. And he turned and walked toward the metro, the navy uniform moving through the midnight city with its particular quality of quiet authority. And she watched him go until the crowd absorbed him, and he was part of the city, part of the ordinary continuing life of a Thursday night in Washington. She stood on the steps alone, the cool air, the street below, the letter in her hand. She looked at the city, and she felt for the first time in 20 years that she was fully occupying the space she stood in. Not apologizing for it, not performing something other than what she was, not waiting to be noticed or credited or placed at a better table. Just standing on the steps of the Grand Meridian Hotel at 11:51 on a Thursday night in a simple white silk dress with a letter in her hand that a stranger had written about her work, thinking about a 7-year-old girl who asked 40 questions at a time and told her father the truth about what she already knew. She walked down the steps. She walked in the direction of the parking garage on 17th Street, through the clear night past the food truck and the dog walker and the taxi, and all the ordinary life of a city that had not paused for any of it. She walked with her shoulders straight and her head up, and the letter pressed between her palm and the clutch bag, and she thought about Monday, about her desk and her open document and the new translation she had accepted 2 weeks ago. A young Hungarian novelist, a debut work, a locked room with no windows, and a door that opened inward. She thought about sitting down at her desk on Monday and opening the file and beginning. She thought about calling Margaret Garrison before the week was out. She thought about a reunion invitation that had arrived in a plain white envelope with gold lettering that she had held for a long time before opening, that she had almost thrown away, that she had instead tucked into her bag and carried to an event she had dreaded and stayed at until nearly midnight. She thought about what it means to stay, to show up, to take the table you're given and do the work that no one sees and trust not blindly, not naively, but with the earned confidence of someone who has survived the years when trust was hard, trust that the work is real even when the room doesn't see it. Because the room always runs out of other options eventually. And when it turns around, you are there, still standing. Everything you built in the invisible years still intact, still honest, still true. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Nora Calloway walked into the Washington night, and she did not look back at the hotel, and she was not the same person who had walked into it 4.5 hours earlier. And she knew it, and she carried it forward. And that act of carrying what you have finally claimed, of refusing to set it back down, of walking into the rest of your life with both hands full of what was always yours. That is how invisible people finally become permanent. Not with a single dramatic moment, not with the applause of a room finally paying attention, but with one step and then another, and then the decision made quietly, made alone, made for real, to never be invisible again.